Welcome to MiWeek. We are so glad that you're with us. I'm Christy McDonald. It is the retirement that's getting a lot of attention. Roy Roberts, the emergency manager of the Detroit Public School System, says he's done. He told staff Thursday morning, much to their surprise, at a time when stability at DPS is crucial, there will now be another change. We will begin there tonight with our contributors, the men of MiWeek, I like to call them, and the editorial page editors of the Detroit News and Detroit Free Press, Nolan Finley and Stephen Henderson. Hi, gentlemen. It's good to see you.
Good to see you.
All right, so I love the headline talking about Roy Roberts. It was Roy Roberts now retiring. What next for Detroit Public Schools? How does this affect the stability of where they're trying to get to?
Well, obviously, it's going to have an impact. Roy Roberts had stabilized the district and was pushing it towards a better financial position, but also really getting a handle on the academics. He just launched this program to try to make the schools hubs of their neighborhoods and bring more kids into the Detroit Public Schools. He seemed to be really getting the job done, and then boom, all of a sudden he announces his retirement, and I really don't know what that's all about.
What does this do for the stability of
Well,
the district,
I mean,
Stephen?
there's the stability question, but then there's also the long-term sort of picture. The Detroit Public Schools have been under emergency management now for 4 years. That's a long time to
This
sort of-
stretch.
This stretch, right?
Right.
This is the second time in for them with state supervision, and there's still no real big answer to how are you going to return this district to some sort of functioning financial stability and academic performance. The truth is, Robert Bob told me 3 years ago that there was no way to balance the books in DPS and actually keep schools operating, that they're just spending too much money on other things. And so there has to be a big rethink of the whole system and the way it's funded and the way that it's
But you
structured.
assume, Steve, that it's possible for this district to become a financially stable, academically performing district. Find another urban district in America where that's true using the traditional public school model. I've thought from the beginning that trying to save these schools was just a futile effort, and it was just prolonging the inevitable. You have to have a whole new model that blows up the big central school district that tends to warehouse kids and figure out what works for each child.
Right. Well, let's talk a little bit. Let's break it down before we start getting into curriculum. Let's break down the financials, at least what Roy Roberts had done in bringing down that deficit from over $300 million down to about, what, 75,
Sure.
$76
Well,
million.
he brought it
But
down-
you still, I mean, that's still a staggering amount.
Well, and he brought it down by restructuring the debt over a longer term.
Right.
So they actually owe more money than they did before he got here. They're just paying less each year on the debt service. So it was a little bit of kicking the can down the road. I'm not knocking him. I mean, I don't know what else you were going to do. I would take issue with the idea that you can't fix urban school systems. There are urban school systems all over the country.
Where?
Boston, the District of Columbia, Baltimore, that have made serious strides in terms of
They're still
creating high
failing more kids than they're educating.
No question, they have serious challenges, and we have not nationally figured out how to mitigate the effects of poverty and other issues in cities inside schools. But that doesn't mean you just give up on it.
I don't know that we haven't figured that out, Steve. There are models that work. There are models that are working in Detroit. What we haven't done in this country
is expand those models.
Is expand the models or have the political will to choose those models over the traditional system. We're locked to the idea that we have to run public school systems the way we always have, and it becomes about turf and control and the adults rather than what works for children. You asked about the finances, Christy. I don't know that there's a way to fix those finances because the legacy costs are fixed and they're this amount, and the revenue that's coming into the school keeps getting smaller every year because of the dwindling enrollment. I don't see how you keep that bomb from going off.
And that's what I want to say. Now that Roy Roberts is leaving, you've got to now find another person to put in that place who has to come up to speed, and how many months does that take?
Sure.
And then what is their path in front of them for the next however many years?
Well, I mean, I think, the problem is there's no plan. There is no idea of what the end game looks like. I mean,
how can there not be an idea of what the end
because
game looks like?
this is a limitation of the emergency manager law. And this is one of the things I think is a big challenge for the governor. Emergency management works to fix finances, right? You can balance the books. It doesn't work when the problem is about the model. And I think we have a problem with the public school model in this state, and we have a problem with the local government model in this state that is going to require a much bigger fix than just coming in and tinkering with the finances.
And at some point, the emergency manager goes away, and you have to turn this thing back over to an elected school board if you keep the current model.
Sure.
And once you do that, I mean, the elected school board, it's been decades in Detroit since they've had any success at running an effective school district. I mean, these school board members are the same people that are getting dragged out of the city council meetings by police. They are not going to sustain a working, productive school system.
Well, but from what you're talking about, that seems that would be many, many years down the road before it would even be turned over
I think
into
under
local control.
this new law, that's not clear. I mean, 18 months, their school board's going to get to vote on whether to keep the emergency.
And again, we keep having this conversation in the context of the emergency manager law, which is not going to fix Detroit public schools. It'll balance the books. It will not fix the bigger problem. And you need the governor to step up and say, let's try something different.
Well, maybe he should start like a Skunks Works group.
I
No,
was just going to say,
that's
now,
right.
wait a
Do it-
minute.
how about we do it in public?
The
That's
secret work
exactly
group, right?
what the governor is trying to do now.
But
Figure
how
out
about we do it
a
in
new
public?
model for education. We do it in public, do it wherever. Just do
Okay,
it.
I always go back to putting on my hat as a parent and saying, if I'm a parent of a kid in DPS right now and I see this change yet again, and after all the lawsuits and all the various things, what is a parent with a kid at Detroit Public Schools supposed to think about this?
Well, half of them have already left. Half of them are
More than
Well, okay,
More
but
than
it doesn't
more
matter.
than that.
What about the people who are there right now?
Well, they're going to leave. I mean, they're going to keep
what-
leaving. because
That's
we
not
got-
an
Well,
option for
yeah.
everybody,
It-
though.
it's
not
an
an
option
option
for
for
more
everybody.
kids because we're going to have a whole flurry of new schools starting in the city or this fall. Choice has become huge for parents. So if they don't like what's happening in public schools, they have other choices, and I expect that's what.
But you're always going to have a certain population that will need to be served in the public schools. The charter schools, for example, have not figured out how to serve special needs kids the same way they serve other kids, and there's always going to be, again, you have. Poverty is very isolating, and intergenerational poverty is even more isolating. There's going to be a class of citizens who are never going to be able to make that choice to do something else. So you have to come up with a way to sustain a public school system. That's a basic tenet of our Constitution, in fact. So I think giving up on it is not the answer. It's figuring out how to make it work on a much smaller level, serving fewer kids, but at a much higher quality, I think.
All right, so any names thrown out? Because again, this is a specialized position.
Well, I mean, there'll be emergency managers. They've got the governor and Andy Dillon have a sort of list that they pick from. E-course is coming out of emergency management. Perhaps the emergency manager from E-course would be available.
She's in Allen Park now.
And she's
got her
already
hands
taken.
full.
I mean,
A lot of
there are
jobs.
people who do this, and I would suspect that he's going to find somebody to do it, just like he did.
Well,
in
and at some
Detroit.
point,
Yeah.
you got to say, we're going to get out of here at some point. 4 years is a desperately long time
Right.
to be doing this.
All right, well, we will continue to watch and wait. Congressman Gary Peters announced this week that, yes, he is running for Senator Carl Levin's seat. That was not a huge surprise, but now that he's in, that kind of changes perhaps the governor's race and brings opportunity for someone in the 14th district. So I like to always take a look at what does this mean for the bigger picture now. We've always talked about how the Democrats need a bench, or they need this next generation of leaders to come in. And Nolan, you've talked about how Gary Peters can't run for everything. And it seemed like the Democrats had put his name up for.
I'm not even sure he's their best Senate candidate, but that's another matter. And I don't think Gary Peters' announcement should be viewed as a Democratic Party. He likes to say, well, now we're not going to have a divisive primary.
But don't they get
know.
together? Don't they get together and have these backroom conversations
doesn't
and kind
stop.
of
Hope they
decide?
are.
That doesn't stop anyone in the next year before the filing deadline from deciding, hey, I can beat Gary Peters and I'm going to file. I would be surprised if there's not a primary on both sides of the aisle. They'd like it not to be that, but I don't think this race is settled. Do they have a gubernatorial candidate? I mean, they got some people talking about it. They're trying to recruit Mark Schauer to get in the race, a congressman who was defeated 2 times ago. Bart Stuback, would be an attractive candidate, I think, if Democrats could get over the fact that he's pro-life. John Austin of the school board is for all appearances, running for governor. So they're going to have candidates. It depends on whether they can bring a candidate, make a case for their candidate, and put some money behind them.
Are you seeing some of the best people step forward now, and with Gary Peters making that decision with the Democratic Party?
Well, I think Gary Peters is the strongest Senate candidate they have. I'm not sure who you think would be stronger. I think the bigger question is governor, right? You need a double-barreled attack next year, and it's unclear who would be the sort of tandem in that race. And yeah, we're seeing names. Some of them are more exciting than others. Some of them are people that I don't know that most people even know, which is going to be very difficult in a statewide race.
Would be surprised if Virg Bonero rolled the dice again.
No,
but I mean, there are folks. I mean, I don't think the Senate race particularly is settled. You've got now. I've heard this over the past week that Dave Camp's reconsidering that decision. He's got $5 million in his primary account. That's on, or his congressional account. That's on the Republican side. People are trying to court, still trying to court Tony Early into the race.
I think that's
on the Democratic side. I would not, again, see Gary Peters' announcement as the end of the Democratic primary. It wasn't a primary vote, and between now and then, people might find somebody they think's a whole lot prettier.
When you raise your eyebrows at Tony Early.
Yeah. No, I think that's the kind of candidate. And I'm not saying whether it should be Tony or not, but I think it's the kind of candidate that they need. Private sector success, can probably self-finance to a large extent in the race. That's a +1 for them if he's the gubernatorial candidate and you have Peters in the Senate race. If it's not Tony, I think it's somebody like that.
Tony's not going to run for governor.
I don't think he's going to either.
I would see him more as a Senate prospect than that. I couldn't imagine him running against Rick Snyder.
Well, okay, so let's say we've got Gary Peters is now shifting over and concentrating on the Senate race. What about his seat, and where do you see people start to line up there?
That's what I think will be very interesting. There will be an awful lot of people who line up for that, some of whom I've already said, hey, I'm interested. But if you look at how geographically disparate that district is, there's a lot of people who live there who hold office now and who will think it's my turn.
Hanson Clark will be back in.
Hanson Clark, Rudy Hobbs, who's a state legislator from Southfield, I think would be a candidate. Buzz Thomas.
I'm just saying, is that seat finally the entree for the next generation of powerful Democratic leaders if they want it?
It could be. I mean, I think certainly the question in that district will be whether the next generation of African American leadership, not just in Detroit, but also in the suburbs, where you have far more African Americans now than you did 20 or 30 years ago, and a lot of them holding public office. It'll be a question of whether they can take that seat and reestablish, that as one of the dynamics.
Yeah, but the seat's 45–50% suburban, right? And I wouldn't be surprised if you see some more, like Gary Peters, an Oakland County candidate step up, whether it's an African American or not. I think you're going to have a lot of people from the suburban portion of that district eyeing the race, and there's probably some attractive candidates out there.
Yeah, not discounting the Republican leadership, but I think it's also an interesting story about what the Democrats can do statewide and what they've been trying to kind of galvanize their.
They have a very weak bench
right
now for statewide races, and that's one of the reasons that term limits hurting them. Doesn't seem to be hurting the Republicans quite the same way is I guess my point, and so you've got to start growing that new leadership, filling in those bench spots so that when Carl Levin or Debbie Stabenow says, I'm not doing this anymore, you've got a lot of choices.
Yeah. All right. Well, speaking of leadership, how many hours a week do you